Dude, I get it the same way. When you tell people you played not just football in college, but you played defensive end in college, people got to be like, dude, you're out of your mind, right? You're crazy.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's a lot of that. Like, but I think to you and folks that played college football, when my size, I'm small, but to regular everyday folks, I'm a big guy, like 6'2", 215 pounds. I think that in their minds that fits, but they don't realize that when I was out on the football field amongst you giants, I was a tiny guy. And like I said, 205, pretending I was way heavier than that. Just trying to do the best I could to be out there fighting amongst you trees.
I can't believe you were only 205. Like, I remember, I always knew you were undersized for a DN, but 205, I mean, you're like the size of a safety.
Yep. And I wanted to be a linebacker. My whole career up until my senior year in high school, that's what I was. And unfortunately or fortunately, I guess from the team perspective, we had a couple of juniors when I was a senior that were just studs. I mean, they both ended up playing Pac-10, and one of them played at Notre Dame. And so the head coach was like, hey, look, you could share time or you could play the entire game, but we need you here. And just the way I was brought up, I wasn't, and this is the early 80s, the late 80s, early 90s. It's a different time, right? I mean, the athlete himself didn't have as much power as I feel like an opportunity and options that they do today. So when a coach said, this is what you were going to do, that's what you did. And, forget the fact that it basically cratered anything, as far as the next level, because nobody wanted 100 in high school. As senior, I was like 190 pounds playing defensive end. Not particularly well, mind you, because I'd never played it before. But, you just do what you're told. And that's that, that it kind of unfortunately, that set my trajectory in football for the rest of my career. Everyone saw me as a guy that had his hand in the dirt. And that's basically where I stayed, despite my efforts to kind of move outside of that. But yeah, I was more positioned as a safety than a defensive end. But, you get in where you fit in.
Yeah, I mean, my story is not much different. I'm 215 pounds right now too, right? And I'm tall. I'm 6'4", but people, they'll be like, "Oh, you played football. What'd you play?" And I'll tell them I was, an offensive tackle, and they look at me like cross-eyed, like there's like no way you were an offensive tackle.
Well, right. I mean, just like no, right. Just our whole concept of what an offensive tackle is, and that's who you were. Right?
Yeah,
you were a 300-pound beast in college. Yeah, the fact that most of us don't do what you did, right? Slim down, looking trim and svelte as you are now. Most of us, once we stop playing, we go the opposite way, right? Because we're just used to eating as much as we can and never having that impact us. Those are things that I had to kind of deal with too early on before I was like, I can't be living like this, and started getting fit and taking that aspects of my life more seriously.
Yeah, man. Yeah. We'll dive into that a little bit later. So let's take a step back. So you came out of a big time football program.
I did. Man. Bishop Amat High School in La Puente, California, in the late 80s, early 90s. I would argue if we weren't the top program in the state of California, we were definitely top 3 every year. And again, this is before national rankings for high school were a thing. There was the USA Today Super 25, and we were always on that list, but we didn't really put too much stock in that. It was more about where you were in California. Where did Cal High have you ranked? And we were always one of those top programs.
Right. So you, but you played, right? You were a starter there.
I came in. I was a baseball guy, right? And okay. I don't think folks know this as well, but Bishop Amat is also a big baseball school. So I came in, and baseball was my sport growing up. It was always I excelled at it. It was always one of the better players on the team. I show up though at baseball's a spring sport. So I show up and football is everything. So I'm like, I'm going to play football. I'm going to see what this is about. Not too dissimilar than Andrew Klein, who was on your show a couple of weeks ago. My mom wouldn't let me play either until I was a freshman in high school. So that was my first taste of it. And to never play football and then go play for a program like Bishop Amat, it was quite a lot to learn, and so that was something for me to kind of get my sea legs under me, so to speak. I mean, my first day on campus for football, you start in the summer. before even school starts. So
Yeah.
To talk about culture shock, right? I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, upper middle class neighborhood, but my high school was 20 miles away in what would be the hood, at least from my perspective. My first day on the field, we have practice. A gang fight breaks out just on the other side of the chain link fence. I mean, talk about culture shock. Right? I've never seen anything like that. I mean, 30 guys just scrapping. We stopped practice and we're watching. My freshman coach, he also, his real job, full-time job is he's a correctional officer. So this is all second nature to him, but I'm like watching this like, holy crap, there's a gang fight going on literally on the other side of this chain link fence. Lot to take in, but that was just kind of part of the whole experience at Bishop Amat.
Yeah. So where in LA did you grow up?
I grew up in Diamond Bar. It's a small, town about 20 miles due east of downtown Los Angeles. I grew up in the early, late 70s, early 80s, and it was not a lot of Asians there. So the running joke in my family is when we first moved to Diamond Bar, there was two Asians, my dad, who's full Chinese, and me and my brother, who are half Chinese. I don't think I saw another Asian kid in my town for, 10, 15 years. It was a long time. The irony of it now is Diamond Bar is 70% Asian. So I guess my family was on the cutting edge.
Trendsetters. Yeah, right. Did you grow up pretty into the culture? Like, did your dad bring the culture?
No, that's a great question. Around? Actually, quite the opposite, right? My dad moved. My dad was born in China right as they went communist. So, and he came from kind of a family of wealth, and communism and wealth, personal wealth don't really mix well. So at that point, early in his life, they moved to the Philippines. That was right when the United States kind of installed Marcos as the dictator there. And they did a very similar thing where they nationalized a lot of their wealth, where you couldn't own anything unless you were a nationalized Filipino. So from there, my grandparents were like, we need to move somewhere that has property rights. Sure. And they went to Hong Kong. My dad didn't much like that. And from there, he, as he got to be university age, he decided that he was in the early 60s. He was going to come to the United States and attend college. Don't know what he was thinking, but ended up enrolling at the University of Arkansas in the early 60s. So if you're talking about culture shocks, right? He was kind of in the midst of all of that. And then not too soon after that, got drafted into Vietnam, where he served. And when he came out of Vietnam, that's where he met my mom, and the whole thing kind of started from there. But because of that, he earned his citizenship by fighting in Vietnam. And when he came out back, I'm American. My kids are going to be American. He was fully assimilated. So there wasn't much of the culture other than every, a couple of times a month, we drive into Chinatown in downtown Los Angeles for dinner. Right. But outside of that, we were full blown bred Americans, and we didn't know any different.
What a cool story, man. I mean, your dad's born in communist China, ends up in the Philippines, goes to Hong Kong, comes to the U.S. for college, and then gets drafted. And all of a sudden, Army, what branch?
Well, as a foreigner, you could only be in either the Marines or the Army. They wouldn't let you be in the Air Force or the Navy. So he was like, screw it. If I got to go fight, I'm going to be a killer. And you join the Marines. Now, my dad is 5 foot nothing, 130 pounds. So, but I'll tell you this, I didn't know my dad my dad post was a different person. Yeah. Right? He's a tough, just no nonsense kind of guy. And that's how we were raised.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's just the Marine.
Yeah. That Marine mentality. Absolutely.
Mentality. Yeah. No, the Marines just celebrated their 246th birthday.
That's right, Semper Fi.
Semper Fi. I have a good buddy of mine. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Marines, and I was actually really honored. They couldn't have the Marine Corps ball this year because of COVID restrictions, but they ended up doing a small 50-person gathering, and I had a chance to sit through and kind of witness all the ceremony around it. It was really a cool experience. So right on, man. So you got your high school career going. When did you decide you want to play college? I mean, you're an undersized kid. You're playing D end
right away.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's funny because my goals were a little different than most people, and we'll get into this because it's kind of some of the learning that I found out about myself. But immediately, even before I got into high school, I wanted to play college sports. I thought I would be playing baseball, if I'm being honest, not football.
Yeah.
But as soon as I stepped foot on the football field for the first time and really got to, you know how it is. One of the first drills you do is that, you're lying on your back. They blow the whistle. You get up and you run into each other. I had never done that
That's
before.
right.
I hit somebody for the first time, put him on his ass, and I was hooked. I was like,
That's it.
And I didn't get in trouble for it, right? I was celebrated, and I was like, this is for me. Like, approved combat, the ability to kind of just beat people up and get your butt kicked and just come back and keep going at it. I loved everything about football. And from there, I still had my baseball ambitions, but I was hooked. And at that point I was like, yeah, I want to go play. And it's also at that point that San Diego State Marshall Falk was kind of a big name there. And
sure.
They were always on television. And I was like, that's where I'd like to go. And it's funny because that's where I was initially. I was also a big Notre Dame fan. Going to a Catholic high school, Notre Dame was a big deal too. But I was like, I think I could play at San Diego State, and didn't have any reason to think that. I was just like, hey, that's what and that was just kind of an early idea in my head. But as my high school career progressed, I don't know that I had specific ambitions about certain schools, but I did know that I felt like I can play at the next level, and I felt like I could play at Division I. And so, I just was kind of pressing towards that. And I had a good trajectory until, I was asked to move to defensive end. And at Bishop Amat, it was different, right? At defensive end wasn't like go after the quarterback. What my job was at Bishop Amat was to keep the tackle off of the linebackers so they could fill and scrape.
Yep.
And so not making a whole lot of plays that show up in stat sheets. But my coaches loved the fact because I was that guy that did exactly what I was supposed to do. You keep that tackle off our linebackers and let them make the plays. That's your job, Wu. And that's what I did. That didn't lead to a lot of sacks. It didn't lead to a lot of tackles, but it led to a lot of great defense. And that's what we were.
Well, one of the things that's changed so much about high school football from, we're the same age and grew up kind of in the same era is, it was rare if you had a high school team that really passed the ball, right. Really threw the ball. Like everybody was running the wing tee. They ran the ball a million times a day. So it was about stopping the run, and stopping the run's all about keeping the linemen off of your linebackers and allowing your linebackers to flow side to side. So, yeah, now you get high school. Every high school's got a quarterback drops back and throws it 25 times
I would have flourished in that, right? Because as an undersized guy, speed was my entire game, right? Not going heads up and bumping up into a guy that was bigger, stronger, and outreached me by 6 or 7 inches. I would have done a lot better in today's game than I did as a defensive end. As a linebacker, I think I would have been fine either way.
So good grades, good student, smart dude. You had some opportunities out of college to go to Penn.
Yeah. So
that's one of the ones.
Very similar to, I was listening to your interview with Pat Swanson, and very similar. I felt I didn't get any of those offers coming out of high school, even though all of my colleagues like USC, Notre Dame, UCLA, they're all getting recruited to major schools, but nobody saw me. They saw me, this little kid. I wasn't exceptionally big, wasn't exceptionally strong. I wasn't making plays because I was doing what I was told, but I felt like I continued to play. So I went to a JC as a full qualifier, meaning that I didn't have to finish 2 years. I didn't have to get a certain GPA. I had good SAT scores, had great grades, but I just wanted to continue my career. And so I went to a local JC, and fortunately, 2 things happened there that really benefited me. I was able to play under a defensive end that really that took me under his wing and taught me how to play the position, right? And like me, he was also undersized, but just way better. Jimmy Irby, he ended up going to Texas A&M, was awesome. To this day, he's a coach, and a lot of his kids are now making it to the T1 level. And another thing was the defensive line coach at the time was very creative. And what I mean by that is he didn't just take, his 2 best tackles or his 2 best ends and his 2 best tackles and run them out there. He took his 4 best pass rushers and tried to put them on the field every time. So there was times even at 205 and shoot at Mount Sac, I was probably 200, not even 205 yet. I was playing tackle, defensive tackle. But because we were running games, we were just annihilating people. And so that really taught me how to play the position, but also with a coach that gave me a chance to get on the field and really show what I could do. And so, that creativity helped. And then I started making plays, started getting noticed. College coaches started inquiring about me, and it really changed the direction. What ended up happening, though, was University Penn, Ivy League, came calling. And what many people may not know is Ivy League schools don't generally, or at least at the time, didn't offer athletic scholarships. So because of my upper class upbringing, my parents, I wasn't in need. So in order for me to work into the program, they were going to have to pay a lot of my way. And I wasn't going to go for free because I had scholarship offers from Southern Utah, University Pacific, San Jose State, but Penn, right? It's like University of Penn, Wharton School. That was in my mind, right? Not even because, and it was also that I didn't have any ambitions beyond Division I football, right? I felt that's where my talent ended, which is a good way in some cases of self-awareness, knowing what your capabilities are, but it's also limiting, right? If you don't think you could do more, then you won't do more. And that's something I learned later on in life. But so I'm set on Penn. It's actually the worst recruitment you could ever have because I'm like, I'm going to Penn, right? So I'm telling all these other colleges, I've made up my mind early in the process, right? So they're doing what they do. They're moving off of me, finding other folks to go to. So everyone knows, like, National Signing Day is the first Wednesday in February. On Monday, that Monday before, which is the 5th of February, and the details are ring true when things really affect you on a certain personal level. I get a call from the guy that was recruiting me from Penn, and I think he's just we're setting up the logistics for Wednesday, the signing. And he calls me to tell me, bad news. We're not going to be able to offer you a place on the team. We found 2 freshmen guys out of the Bay Area that were full ride financial aid, meaning that we weren't going to have to come out of our budget for it. Mm-hmm. And I was devastated, not just because I lost on the school I really wanted to go to, but now it's 2 days before National Signing Day and I have nothing. So I'm getting on the phone trying to call up all these schools, and they're all telling me all the bad news, like, sorry, we've moved on. We've filled up our allotment for defensive scholarships. And now, February 7th, which is Wednesday, comes and goes. I have no signing. The rest of the year comes and goes. And I'm just, I've gotten over it. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. I'm working out every day, just trying to bide my time. And what happens is the running backs coach at my JC sees me. He's like, hey, how you doing? And I tell him my story. He hadn't heard of it. Why would he, right? He's on the offensive side. Mm-hmm. And I tell him, he's like, man, that's terrible. He's like, is there anything I can do? I'm like, well, if you can get me into a school, that would be great, because I don't really have anywhere to go at this point. I'm trying to figure out. And at this point, I think my career is over, right? What am I going to do? So he's like, you mind if I make a call? And he does. He makes a call. And it turns out he calls Claude Gilbert, who's the defensive coordinator of San Diego State. Turns out this running backs coach, his name is Binky Benton, played for Claude Gilbert when Claude was the head coach of San Diego State in the 70s. And turns out Binky Benton was one of Claude Gilbert's favorite players. He's a 5'5" running back, just wrecking ball of a player. And if you know anything about Claude Gilbert, you know the type of players that he loves.
Oh, loves
tail type guys, right? And those are his favorite. Right. And that's who Binky was. So Binky makes this call. I don't even know what he's calling. He comes back 10 minutes later and he's like, hey, can you be at San Diego State tomorrow? I'm like, what? Yeah, of course. All right. Well, you're going to drive down here. He gives me this piece of paper, directions, says I'm going to meet with Claude Gilbert. I don't even know who he is. So I show up the next day. Coach Gilbert had already talked to Coach Benton, had already gotten my transcripts all before he talked to me. He already knew the kind of person that I was. And so he's talking to me, and he basically says, hey, look, James, I have everything I need. do you want to come play here? And I was like, yes. He gets up from his office. He walks me across campus to the administration office, and he enrolls me that day. This is July, right?
Yeah.
Like mid-July. He enrolls me into all the classes. He has my transcript, so I'm not just getting into I'm getting into 4 classes I need. He gets me enrolled. 2 weeks later, I'm showing up to football camp. I don't know anybody. I hadn't been recruited. I was kind of forced onto Coach Delgado, who's the defensive line coach's thing. He doesn't even know who I am. And I show up that day, and the rest is history, right? I had to earn my way back on. But another thing Coach Gilbert did that most people who play with me probably don't know is that he set me up with academic scholarships. I was not on even, I walked on initially, but by the second semester, I was full ride academic scholarship for the rest of the way. And so I wasn't a scholarship that was taken off of the football team. I made my own way, but that was all set up by Coach Gilbert. And for that, I will forever be loyal to that man. He will always have a special place in my heart because him and Binky Benton changed the direction of my life. And honestly, I don't even know that either of them really know that, but that's the impact that they've had on me. And that's the loyalty that to this day I have for San Diego State, because from my perspective, they were there for me when I felt like nobody else was.
Yeah, man. I obviously played on the offensive side, but how do you not love Coach Gilbert? I mean, that dude's just
I worked my way into becoming one of his favorite players. And it's funny because if you talk to any of my defensive teammates at the time, one of the things that they always greet me with is "put in woo," and it was this thing that Coach Gilbert used to do, right? When somebody would mess up on defense, he would, and it didn't even matter. I played defensive end. It could be a safety, a linebacker. Yeah. If they messed up, he put woo in there. At least he knows the damn drills. He knows the assignment. He won't fuck this up. And I look back at now with a lot of fondness. At the time, I felt like it was a bit of a diss, though. Like, wait a second, are you insulting?
Like almost like patronizing, yeah.
But as I grew, I realized it wasn't that. It was more like people need to depend on reliability, and if you can't be reliable, then there's not a lot of use for you. Whether you're talking about business or sports or any team setting, right? You have to be somebody that can be counted upon. I didn't get that at the time. I get it now.
Well, look, for people out there that don't know, the idea that a 205-pound defensive end was going to come out there on that team at that time with those people that were in front of you, like it's actually insane. Like, I don't even know if you realize how impressive that was, right? Like, you weren't, look, San Diego State's a mid-major program, but you weren't backing up mid-major guys. Like, Kabir Bajavi-Miller went out and had, 80 sacks in the NFL. That guy, made Pro Bowl teams, right? And, you look on the other side of the ball, you got Scotty Nick, you got, Antoine Young. I mean, these dudes were beasts.
Oh, yeah. All people I still talk to this day. But I'll say this, more impressive than the people I play with alongside me was the people that I got to go up against every day. And listening to a lot of your podcasts where you're talking to those guys, Mike Milano, Andrew Klein, people like Kyle Turley. I don't think folks will ever really truly appreciate the type of animal beast that Kyle Turley was on a field. Just no off button with that guy, and getting to go against him in practice every day. It made facing anybody else in the nation easy. Like, there was no intimidation because I would battle Kyle Turley and every one of you guys. And I think one other thing that people won't ever really truly know, Greg, is because San Diego State was a bit shunned in the mid 90s when we should have been making all those bowl games as one of the best California college football teams. And we were always getting bypassed by another team. How great that offensive line was. I mean, and I'm not just talking about the starters, the depth. You and Andrew Klein, you guys were backups to that line, and you guys were studs. And so it wasn't just like going against you guys in practice and that. You guys kept rotating in, even just constantly good folks, and getting those types of reps, and then being able to take that out against San Jose State or Fresno State. It just it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same level of competition at all.
I feel the same way. I mean, when I became the starter there, and I would go up against starting left tackle, going up against the starting defensive right end, which was Kabir. I went against Kabir every single day in practice, and that dude used to kick my ass. Like, I mean, he was a load, man. That dude was fast. That guy could run through you. He could do all those things. I'd get in games, and I mean, I didn't play anybody.
Right. It's just you have no fear, no intimidation. You know what to expect, and when they don't ever step up to that level, then you have a bit of an edge on them, and at the very least psychologically, if not physically.
Yeah. So, well, good, man. You finished out. I joke. I mean, you were, I know, an academic guy, all academic whack, all those types of things. So, you're a little bit smarter than the average dude. But what people need to realize, and I don't know what your thoughts on this is. You major in football.
Yes.
It is what it is. Like that is what you do. Like you're a student athlete now. You're an athlete student. Like a lot of those are there to stay eligible and get the minimum, and you kind of get to the point where it's over, and now you're like, now
right.
what? Right? Like I'm supposed to now I got to start my career.
And it's different because I didn't have that extended runway that a lot of our teammates did of wanting to play at the next level. By the time I was a senior at 205, my body was breaking down. Like I knew I couldn't keep doing it. And one of the things I'd always prided myself on prior to that was I was always available, right? I never got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, just, playing at that level for so long, being undersized, it started to break me down. So by the time I was a senior, I kind of known, right? I knew that this was it, and I didn't really have any more ambitions to continue. The hard part was the transition, like what's next, and to the point that you were making, when you're playing at a program like San Diego State, it is your life, right? And you're not working. You don't have some side part-time job that you're going to.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the problems that I found kind of graduating was I had no work experience. Right. I was a major in business management that had never managed anything. So, I'm going on all these interviews now, and it's like, what do you do? And I remember, because it was funny. One of my first interviews was Collier International, which, who Sam is working for now.
Yeah, Pat.
And I couldn't have done a worse job. I just kind of applied for the position. I had done no research. I didn't even know what the job entailed. And I'm asking stupid questions like, so what is the job? And wondering why I never got called back. But you go through those lessons, you learn to improve. And I did. And then coming out of college at the time, this is the late 90s, right? I got into what a lot of folks got into. I think you said too, I got into financial services. And I actually found myself doing very well there. I didn't have any prior background there, but I was always good with numbers. And I was phenomenally good with numbers. Yeah. And just one of the things I seemed to excel at was the interpersonal aspects of managing people and meeting people and also getting them to say, here's my life savings, please invest that for me. I got really good at that. And so, the first couple of years out of college, that's what I was doing. I got set up with a small company called Sun America, which was a subsidiary of AIG at the time. And, I did pretty well. One of the biggest issues I had with them was that they love to say that they were independent, but they only wanted you to sell their Sun America funds, which nobody had heard of. So, I used to get in trouble because I would be selling people Fidelity and Janus funds because that's what folks heard of. I mean, what did I care? But, you start getting into the politics of business, and I learned my lessons fairly early on that folks really like things to happen a specific way.
Well, I mean, look, that is a really, really difficult business to break into. I mean, the attrition rate for financial advisors is like through the roof. I mean, it's probably like 95%. And, you don't really get paid a salary. You're 22 years old. And it's like their model is basically like, all right, hey, call up everybody know. Tell them you're in the business. Here's a little, here's an older person who's going to kind of go along with you on those calls. And, you're like, hey, give me all your money. Let me manage your assets. And they're like, what do you know? Like, you don't even have any money. Like, you've never had any money. So for you to be able to actually find some success in there, like there's a level of grit, man. I mean, yeah, talent's there. Like, you gotta be talented, you gotta be smart, you be able to talk to people, but like, you gotta have a little bit of grit to be able to like have those conversations and push through that. Like, where did that come from? I mean, is that something you've always had like throughout your life, right? Or is that something that kind of developed over time? Does that come from your dad?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I think it's always been in me, but a part of it was developed, early on from my brother. My brother is 6 years older than me. So anybody who's had an older sibling knows like the pain of that. When in 6 years at early ages, that's a giant time. And my brother was merciless. A lot of where I feel like my toughness comes from is from him, right? He taught me that, you couldn't be you couldn't be a punk out anywhere. I mean, if you were, people were going to take advantage of that. And so that part of that grittiness came there. A lot of it came from the fact, though, that I always felt that my last name, when I was younger, I looked a lot more Asian than I do today. I had the bowl haircut and everything. I always felt that worked against me. People always, they under-expected things from me. Like, they just never expected that I could be a good athlete or anything. I mean, being a smart classroom, I think folks always expect that. It's one of the, the stereotypes of being Asian. But being a good athlete, not one of them. And I always felt like I had to be that much better than everybody just to prove that I belonged on that field. So, and that was the same mentality I took to San Diego State, right? It wasn't like I was recruited to be there. I was there kind of, with a bit of dumb luck and some grace. But I still felt that I had to prove to everybody, not just the coaches, but my teammates, that I deserved to be there. And it's that mentality that's kind of, I still have to this day. You had said that, you kind of took it as like a chip on your shoulder. For me, it was more like a constant backwind that was pushing me forward, even though there was all this adversity in my face.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. So you told me a story the other day. I think it's got to go down in the Hall of Fame of the worst possible timing ever. And it's kind of funny. It's not funny because it's a serious issue, but you went on your own and you started a financial advisory firm, and your first day of operations is September 10th, 2011.
So it's the Monday after Labor Day. Of course, I wasn't going to start. I was going to enjoy that whole week off. I've been planning this exit for months. I've been sandbagging business. Because what I had done is I negotiated a 90% payout. And that's unheard of for somebody at my level of production. I was good production, but not a 90% payout is somebody reserved for $500,000, $1 million plus GDC, gross dealer concession. I was doing about 150. But I managed to negotiate a 90% payout. And at the time I was getting like a 45% payout. So why the hell would I submit business and make half the money? So I've been sandbagging all of this business. I was going to wait. And it was going to be the first bit of business I was going to do through this new firm. And I just kind of coasted through the summertime, right? Because I was planning to leave the old firm, and I've been setting up all the plans. Monday after Labor Day of September 2001, it's September 10th. Decent first day, nothing exciting. It was more like just let's turn the lights on and do all this. And then I wake up Tuesday, September 11th, and the world has changed. And I mean, it couldn't have been any worse timing for me. But that was just the beginning of the chaos that ensued. What ended up happening after that was just a series of bad decisions, one after another, that just kind of continued to multiply on me, and almost entirely because of my own arrogance and ignorance. Right? I went into this thing thinking I knew it all. I didn't take any time to seek out any mentors, and I just made every bonehead mistake a new business owner could possibly make, and it was devastating to me.
Why didn't you seek out any mentors? Was it something where you didn't think it was important, or did you just feel like at this point in your life you knew everything you needed to know, and
all of the above, and it was all bad, right? And I look back at that time now, and what I know and what I've learned subsequently, And it's like, that, how dumb could you be? And I'll give you a perfect example. One of the things that I had to have for my new operation was this fancy office, right? And if I had just talked to anybody who had ever run their own business ever, they would have asked us a couple of basic questions. Hey, that's a beautiful office. How many clients do you have coming into your office on a regular basis? The answer to that would be 0. I would meet all my clients out there. So, but I had to have this fancy office, right, to fit my ego, because I was starting this new company, had to have a fancy office that I was paying a crap load of overhead for. And that was mistake number one. And it just, these constant small mistakes that just took all of my seed money and all the capital that I had been saving to start this business, just whittling it down. It's one of the things that really was the most upsetting for me is I'm a lifetime saver. And I had saved all this money to start this new company. And I blew through that money in months and went from a profit position to now I'm putting things on credit and digging this huge hole for myself, just continuing to dig happily. Like, I'm going to dig my way out of this problem with no experience and no guidance. And all I did was dig deeper holes.
It's something I think about a lot in my own life where, when you first start off in business, especially like as an entrepreneur, you don't really have true experience. And if you don't have those mentors around you, you're doing things that you think you're supposed to do. It's almost like you're acting like an entrepreneur, right? Like, isn't this what an entrepreneur is supposed to do? Like, I remember so much, like when I started my first company, I don't know, I like wanted to have a corporation, and it was like, I wanted to do this thing. And I'm like, meeting with like the lawyer, and the lawyer's just looking at me like, why are you doing this? Like, it's like, you're going to run a C corporation. You got to have board minutes. And like, are you looking at like, why? And then, you kind of get to it as an adult and you realize it from experience. And it's like, you don't need to do things because you think you need to do them. Like there's things that you should be doing because they're the right things for your business at that time. And it's like getting an office is a great example. Like, did you really need that big flashy office? No, but isn't that what successful business people do? People they have big offices. Yeah. Like, don't I need to have a big reception area with a, like a sitting room for people to come into? It's like, well, nobody visits your office, so probably not, but you don't know those things earlier in a career. But, so how do you end up in this automotive world, man?
So, I'll fast forward to this part, right? I was one of the things that after almost 12 months of just misery, just bad mistakes. And then I finally made a good one, and it was getting into real estate early. Right. And that's kind of a common theme for a lot of the folks you've been talking, the entrepreneurs you've been talking to, how real estate. And so that's kind of what got me out of my hole. So I started to climb out, and I was partnering with somebody that was really in real estate, and that kind of started to grow my company, right? The trajectory was right where I wanted it to be. And now I'm making money and I'm doing things. But I think the problem that I was having, and I think a lot of young folks have, is success. I thought success was about how much money I could make. Right. But what I started realizing early on was, once I got past the problem and started having success in business because I was doing the right things, right? Focused on my craft, not focused on generating income. I realized that I wasn't necessarily happy doing what I was doing. I was making a lot of money for a lot of people. I was making good money for myself. But then I started having problems with my business partner. I started having problems with my clients, and not problems in the way that it was more like the entitlement. You have to understand, I was rescuing a lot of these folks from the .com bubble bursting, where they started with $500,000, and now by the time they came to me, they might have had 150, and then I had grown that account back up to $600,000, $700,000, and now they're bitching at me because they're taking quarterly paper losses for 15 grand, and it's like, what are you talking about, right? I just turned your $130,000 to $700,000. You're going to come bitch at me because you're down $15,000 with a paper loss. And so all of that stuff started to kind of build up on me. And I had never had a vacation, Greg. You know what I mean? I was spending 80, 90 hours a week on this thing, not having anything of a personal life. And it just felt at that point like, man, people don't appreciate what I'm doing here. And so I was looking for a change. And my father at the time was kind of ending his career and was working at American Honda. And he had just said, hey, look, I know you're struggling right now kind of with everything going on. Maybe you look at this. I was like, nah, because I had that entrepreneurial mindset. Didn't really want to go work for a corporate entity, but I relented and I ended up running American Honda's licensing company. And they had, and the thing about it was when I got there, they were doing like $500,000, $700,000 a year just by accident. And that was almost all on keychains and license plate frames. I was like, man, this could be so much more. So one of the first things I did was I started working with all the video game manufacturers, Microsoft, Sony PlayStation, because they had all these game racing simulation games like Gran Turismo and Forza. And the first thing I learned from them was there's a formula. Like they didn't pay more to get a Ferrari into a game than they paid to get a Buick, for example. You're not going to see too many Buicks in a racing game. But what they did was they had a formula. And basically they took the number of vehicles that you put into a game divided by the total number of vehicles and multiplied it by a common ratio that applied to everybody. So what I did was I convinced these video game companies. The problem I had was Honda doesn't have a bunch of sexy cars. They had one. It was an NSX, an Acura NSX. So what I did was I got that one Acura NSX into the game 10 or 15 times by changing the livery on it. And what that did was it took our video game revenue from something like $100,000 a year to like $10 million a year across all of those categories. And so I was like, man, this is great. It was one of the best jobs I ever had because it was so fun. The reason when I realized it wasn't for me, and I also realized that working for these mega corporations wasn't for me either, was when I negotiated a huge gargantuan deal with Doral, which at the time was the largest manufacturer of car seats. And I don't know what it was like for you, Greg, when you were raising your kids, your daughters early, but going into Babies R Us and trying to pick a car seat. You have all these car seats. You don't know which one. At the time, and this is in the mid-2000s, the best-selling car seat was Eddie Bauer. And the only reason it was the best-selling is because people recognized it as a brand. So I got to thinking, well, shit, Honda has a reputation for safety. And if you put a car seat and branded it with Honda, I bet that a bunch of people would want to buy that car seat. So I negotiated a $100 million minimum guarantee per year with Doral. $100 million. That was just the minimum guarantee. Got that all situated, got it worked through all the corporate entities, and then Honda Japan came in at the 11th hour and killed the deal. And I'd spent the better part of 6 months on that deal, getting all the everything lined up. It was likely going to generate over $1 billion in revenue for American Honda, and they killed it because they didn't want their brand associated with a potential fatality for a child, which I get, but I thought it was short-sighted, and it was one of the biggest reasons why I had to leave, right? Because I just putting that much work in, and just for somebody at the 11th hour to say, you know what, we don't think this is good for this reason, and not even really engaging with you, I couldn't do that. And lo and behold, a job rec ended up on my seat for XM Radio. And so kind of migrated into that and got into that aspect of automotive where I was supporting automotive, but from the entertainment perspective. And I did that for a long time. Moved to Stitcher Radio in 2010 before podcasting was a thing, and ran BD for them and got them into 5 million cars, and then got recruited back to SiriusXM about 9 years ago. And this is where I've been lately running. I'm vice president of automotive. And, I don't know that this is what I planned for myself, but mostly now I negotiate all of these major contracts with these automotive companies, and I got pretty good at it. Who knew?
So, you think about the time with Honda, right? And you're almost like in an entrepreneurship role, right? It's you got this little division within, this huge corporation, and they're not doing a lot. And all of a sudden they give you the keys and you're able to kind of run with it and do some really interesting creative stuff. I mean, even just the gaming, just the thinking through the gaming story that you told was really cool. And then you get this kind of like, I don't even know what you call it. It's not really a joint venture, but you have this opportunity for this huge revenue stream to come in through Honda. It makes sense. I get your perspective on they don't want to be tied to, the death of the baby, but like they make cars and there's car accidents all the time. So I mean, that argument kind of falls down a little bit. But from a culture perspective, like internally, like when you got out of Honda and then you moved to Sirius, which was, still a little bit of a startup.
Very
right?
much the mentality, right?
Sirius.
They were public at the time, but the mentality was very much startup. Yeah.
Oh, they were. Yeah. And then obviously Stitcher.
That was full startup mode.
More
right?
of a startup at the time. Like how was the culture different? I'd love to hear that.
So, I mean, anybody who's ever worked anything corporate, there's bureaucracy involved, right? And at a place like, I would say Honda runs very similar to the military. And if you want to move up in that organization, somebody has to leave or die, right? Otherwise, folks sit in their chairs for 20 some odd years. That really wasn't something I was interested in. But it was something I enjoyed doing. The job itself of licensing was fun. I got to do a lot of cool things. But as far as from a career perspective, I knew immediately that wasn't the thing to do. So, moving over to SiriusXM, they had this entrepreneurial aspect. Although it was a public company, they were very new. And it was more raising, the only reason they were public was they needed to raise the capital to launch satellites into space, right? It wasn't, to get, equity for a lot of folks.
This is post Howard.
This is
post Howard Stern,
right? So this is pre-Howard. Right?
Okay,
They're negotiating this deal with Howard while I'm kind of being onboarded, and they announce it afterwards. The big thing that happened though, when XM and Sirius merged, was that it happened at the same time that the Great Recession happened, and because there was so much, there was so much borrowing that SiriusXM needed to do to get all of they were called, right, and all of a sudden they couldn't meet their debt obligations. So we got a white knight bid from Liberty, but what happened during that time is nobody could do anything. So all of the creative ideas that I was working on before, they just stopped because there was no money. Everything seized up, and I didn't lose my job, but at the time I'm sitting on my hands doing nothing, surfing the internet for 8 hours a day at work, and I hated it. I felt like I was stealing money from the company. So I left and I went to Stitcher Radio, which nobody had heard of at the time. And one of my mentors that I had sought out now, right, who happened to be my former boss at XM, had moved on to Pandora. He was running their BD. So then what I did was I just slipped into Pandora's Slipstream. At the time, this is 2010, Pandora was one of the biggest names, since replaced by Spotify. But in 2010, Pandora was the name in streaming. And so what I would do is he would go in and call on GM and say, hey, we're going to do this. And I would come in right in behind him and say, hey, you have the solution for audio in Pandora. Stitcher is your solution for streaming talk. And I knew all the talking points about what SiriusXM and how they did it. And I was able to kind of convey that to them and really just touch on the hot buttons and that I knew motivated folks. That's one thing I've gotten very good at, Greg, is understanding what motivates people, why they're willing to make the decisions that they are. And once you understand what their motivations are, then you just attack those motivations, right? And you really just start gassing them up.
Sure.
And it really does touch on something that Pat talked about. You're playing the long game, right? If you're trying to go in and sell somebody on the first visit, you're kidding yourself, right? Big sales, big things happen over periods of time where you create these relationships. And one other thing I found out is these big deals don't happen between companies. They happen between individuals. And it's those relationships that you build up over time that's really where the business is made.
How do you, I agree with that, but because there's so much bureaucracy, especially, now in your situation, you're talking to Honda and Toyota and Kia and these, huge organizations. How do you navigate the internal bureaucracy of the target customer to get what you need to accomplish? Like, are you mapping this all out?
That's a great question. It's about that motivation works both ways. And it's not just about knowing the motivation of the other person across the table from you that you're trying to negotiate a deal with. It's also understanding what the motivations of your company are. So what I always try to do, Greg, is I know very well what the three-prong strategy of SiriusXM is. So whenever I put a structure in front of my finance company for approval, I'm making sure that I'm hitting those 3 points. Hey, this is how this deal is going to add subscribers. This is how this deal is going to help improve streaming. This is how this deal is going to continue to ensure that we own and dominate the car, right? The three tenets of our business. And then I just go sell on those points. But there'll be a different set of points that I'm selling to the other people across the table because they have different motivations. So it's constantly juggling everybody's motivations and then aligning them. I'm a middleman, Greg. That's what I do, right? And I'm putting the parties together. But my job is intelligence, understanding what each side needs to make the deal work. Because when you're talking about the size of the deals that I'm negotiating, like they're difficult. They're very difficult. And you're talking about, $10 billion of revenue when it's all said and done. Like there's a lot of eyeballs on those things.
So when you're, thinking about, people around you, teammates, expanding, growing yourself, how do you train people? Like what is your thoughts from that perspective?
People better of now
me. Passing on some of the
So wisdom? I know I'm very self-aware, right? I know what my strengths and my weaknesses are, and I try to improve my strengths. I try to work on my weaknesses, but I'm always looking for people who do things better than me. Another thing that I learned from football, and particularly at San Diego State, and this is through no fault of San Diego State. Remember, I was kind of forced on them, but my style of play didn't fit the type of defense that we ran. And for example, as a 200-pound defensive end, it never made sense for me to go strike a blow to somebody like you or Kyle Turley, who are stronger, had longer reach than me. It wasn't a good idea. So one of the things that I've always tried to pride myself in is finding what people are good at and then helping guide them into situations where they can help themselves and the company based on what they're good at. Right? And then you give them the coaching on the things they're not good at so they can improve. But really the job is to put the pieces on the board in a way that is augmenting what you're trying to do. I don't need somebody to do what I do. But if you do these three things better than me, for example, you're better at interpreting analytics. That's a huge value to me, right? But if you're not good at it, and there's a lot of people who aren't good in front of the partner. They're just too technical. They're too dry. They're too kind of mechanical. You take them out of the partner, you put them in a back seat, let them do that behind the scenes, and I found that they flourish. And then there's those people that are just amazing in front of the partner, but they have no strategy, right? So you put them partner facing and you pair them with somebody that does have those technical capabilities. So that's what I've found myself doing now is more kind of putting the pieces on the board to get the things done that need to get done.
Yeah. I spent a part of my, earlier career in enterprise BD, and we were doing, like large, same as you, tens, if not $100 million, SAP implementations, Oracle implementations, et cetera. And I would front end a lot of the BD activities. And we'd always call it, it's like quarterbacking the relationship, quarterbacking the deal, right? It's like, you can't do all the work. Like you need the really good technical experts, you need the finance experts, you need, all those types of people that are around you, the subject matter experts for particular areas. And now you're just, moving the chess pieces around the board, right? You're kind of setting the strategy and making sure the right people in the right place, they know what they need to accomplish, and
being very clear and direct though with the directions, right? And I think that's one thing I found amongst poor leadership is that their directions are nebulous. Like they almost expect you to reach inside of their mind, pull out what they're thinking, and then execute against that. And I hate that, right? I hate when there's any ambiguity in what people are supposed to be doing. I'm very this is what we need to get done. I'm less prescriptive on how, right? Because I want my experts in my team to feel like they have the flexibility and the independence to get it done their own way. But as long as they all understand what needs to get done, and I'm very clear on what needs to get done in the timeframes that they need to get done on, then you step back and you let your experts do what they do, right? You got to let your team work. You can't micromanage them. Otherwise, you're not going to get the most out of them.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, I think you just summed up my own, leadership philosophy. I mean, we always talk about it from an organizational perspective of having at a minimum a North Star. Right. Like you got to have this like direction, like this is the destination. This is what success is going to look like. And then, you can break it up into some smaller objectives of what needs to accomplish in a shorter period of time. But then you kind of got to get it out of people's way, right? They need to know where they're going. and you want to make sure that everyone's aligned and going in the same direction. Because I think a lot of companies mess up with that. I've been in this situation where I've had to come in as a management consultant in a lot of ways. And, one of the first things I do is just interview people. And one of the questions I always ask is like, what are we doing here? Like, what does your company do? Like, where are you guys going? And you would be shocked that nobody, in most cases for dysfunctional companies, you'll hear 10 different answers from 10 different people. They don't even know what you're trying to accomplish or the founder of the company is trying to accomplish. Everybody's working towards different goals, different objectives, et cetera. And it's like, at that point, you can have the best people in the world, but if you're trying to do 10 different things and no one's aligned, you're never going to be successful. So, it's getting people aligned. And then, I think you said it really well. It's like,
that's it.
Get the hell out of here.
Set the North Star direction. Set your expectations of what you expect on how things get done, but then you got to give folks the freedom to operate. And that's what, individuals did for me early in my career and what I try to do for them. I call it gravity, right? It's like you want to be this Jupiter in the solar system where you're kind of sucking in the asteroids and the comets so they're not hitting and bombarding you constantly, freeing up the team to go get the things done. Because at the end of the day, it's the team that's doing the work, the day-to-day. I'm just kind of captaining the ship, right? And setting direction and trying to align my corporate objectives with my team's objectives. But ultimately, it's the team that's doing the work day-to-day. And you got to give them that. Right. Not if you give them an independence in the sense of it, they also feel the pride when it goes well. And that's critically important to me, the pride of success, right? And that's another thing that I'm constantly talking about that comes from my athletic background is wins are important. You got to show wins, right? And I think people constantly want to sit around and waiting for the whales to land on them. No, you got to be hunting all the time, right? And one of the things I tell everybody on my team is if you need to go out and find business that pays your salary every year, right? Because if you are paying for your salary, you will always have a job. And that mentality is kind of pure entrepreneurialism, right? It's like, go out and figure out how you can grow this business. And I'm not talking about doing it in a manner that's, you have to go land that big deal, right? These small deals are the ones that lead to the big deals down the road. Yeah, no, I agree. At the end of the day, it's scoreboard, right? I mean, you're not going to win. You're not going to win every game or every deal, but at the same time, like we're going to keep score, and it does matter. It absolutely matters. You can't put that aside. And I know you're the same because we came from the same place. It is about winning, right? But I think as I get older, my definition of what winning and quote unquote success has changed a little bit. It's matured. As I told you early on, it was about making as much money as possible. Now it's more about striking that ideal work-life balance because my kids are at that age, 12 and 9 years old, where I want to spend more time with them. One of the lessons I learned from my mentors was that they worked so hard during those formative years that they missed a lot. And when you talk about their biggest regrets, it's that they weren't there for their kids' lives. And I didn't, and when I look back at my own childhood upbringing, my dad was a workaholic too. I didn't see my dad. My dad didn't show up at any of my games. Not woe is me. That was just life. But I wanted my kids to have a different experience. And part of why I kind of fell into this role at SiriusXM, because when I exited Stitcher Radio, I kind of had a lot of options. I could continue down in the startup community. I kind of made a name for myself in that Bay Area startup scene. And I had a couple of options there. But one of the things that struck me with SiriusXM coming back, which is something I promised myself I would never do, go back to a company that I had left. But what struck me was two things: that they were making a concerted effort to bring on entrepreneurial people like myself, and I was going to have more control over my work-life balance, not having to fly all over the country at all times, doing everything that I needed to do to be successful, to help Stitcher be successful in the early days. That was becoming unsustainable for me, just from where I wanted to be in my current space, right? I didn't want my kids to be growing up being like, yeah, my dad was successful, but he really wasn't there. And that became really important to me as I started to mature and me and my wife kind of started talking more about what we wanted out of our lives. that became more of the focus, and which made SiriusXM, and still to this day makes it a really good fit for me because, you know, they've tied me to this company with all of the long-term incentive plans, right? It's hard. It'll be very difficult for me to ever leave.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they've also afforded me a lot of flexibility in my schedule where I can leave early and assist and coach my son's baseball team, right? And that's important to me because, you know, when he grows up, he's going to remember those times and know that, you know, work wasn't the most important thing for me to him. It was him. And so if I leave the earth and that's what he has, and my daughter the same way, I'm gonna feel like I was successful.
Yeah, man. I couldn't agree more. You know, and I feel the same way. You know, you got to remind yourself, right? Like it's like I think to myself a lot of just about, you know, enjoy the journey. Right. It's not a destination. It's not like I'm racing to something. It's like, because I think there's people out there that have these, you know, aspirations and these things they want to do. And then they get there and then they realize like, it's like empty.
It was the
like
journey.
kind of depressed.
It wasn't the destination. And I agree. And I didn't know that. That wasn't something I learned early on or even was taught. My destination was money. Let's make as much of it. Let's get rich. Yeah. And the funny thing was, the more I was focused on that, the less I attained it. It wasn't until I kind of set that aside and really perfected my craft, got good at what I could get good at, learn, read. One of the things I love about your podcast, Greg, isn't just the content, which I love immensely. It's that you've probably added 10 books to my damn reading list, right? And so I'm an avid, voracious reader. I can't know enough. Yeah. And I want to know it from people who have done it. And that's what's important to me, because I think in today's day and age of social media and influencers, there's so much kind of fake success, right? I really appreciate what I feel is real success, meaning not that it manifests itself in a lot of money or big properties or big houses and sports cars, but that you've learned some things and then can articulate them to the next set of folks and say, hey, this is real, meaningful things. And if you do these, if you follow these practices, you will find your own success. And that's what I most appreciate, Greg, about what you're doing here. I couldn't be a bigger fan. I've listened to all the podcasts, and I mean, I've gotten into cycling lately because as COVID kind of hit and shut down my whole gym life, I had to find something else. And I'm telling you, man, like, I don't think I've found anything that gets me from point A to B better than listening to your podcast. I really enjoy it.
Oh man, that's super kind, bro. I appreciate that, man. And I honestly, this is why I'm doing it. There are conversations like this. I didn't necessarily have an agenda for this. You know, it was just something I'm passionate about. And you know, people would ask me why, you know, what are you going to do? What are you trying to get out of it? And I just was like, you know what, man, I just want to reconnect with really interesting people and have great conversations and, you know, see what happens. And that's the experience I've had. And I mean, these conversations to me are so much fun. I actually wish I could find a way to just do this.
Well, hey, I mean, if I can help, I will.
Only
right?
do this.
Mean, we own Stitcher, we own Pandora, right? So you're already on our networks, but keep doing it, man. I've already passed you on to a few people, just straight up. I'm so impressed with what you're doing. There is not anything else that I've seen, and I'm a voracious podcast listener. Just, you know, just based on my time at Stitcher, it really got me involved in it. And I've been looking for something like this. And so I want you to know that, right? Like, you're hitting a mark. You are definitely hitting a mark.